That's pretty much the craziest thing I've heard in a really, really long time. The EU now wants to mobilize 10 trillion of its citizens' assets to make the EU militarily capable. Just take a look at that. And when they talk about mobilization here, it's nothing less than a potential wave of expropriations rolling toward the EU. This news is really blowing up on social media right now, and we absolutely have to look at the report behind it now that reveals the details. Because this is not about putting together some kind of package worth 800 billion, like what Ursula von der Leyen has planned with Rearm Europe, or here in Germany special funds where new debts are issued or money is partially printed. And so, through a bailout, the citizens are expropriated. Instead, this is more about a bail-in, meaning taking existing assets and mobilizing them, which is exactly what this mobilization refers to, that it's not really clear whether that means taking the money directly or just using it. Because the argument here is that there's so much money just sitting in savings accounts that earn very little interest, and we could get our hands on this capital now. We shouldn't do anything here. So what is happening here, what is sitting in the savings accounts, is absolutely absurd. Sure, you could say that savings accounts are a scam anyway, but still, you can't just go after people's savings accounts just because you want to finance some war machinery or something like that. This is absolutely outrageous. A line is being crossed here that shouldn't be crossed. Let's take a look at that. We're also going to look at why a burden-sharing scheme is definitely a possibility. I saw a really, really interesting assessment of that from an expert, an expropriation expert, who speaks frankly and shares his opinion. And also says, hey, it can't be that we still have a burden-sharing law in the basic law or here, in the legislation in Germany. And if this law exists, then it will most likely be activated sooner or later. Because why else would this law exist? Before we take a look at the article, I have to say right off the bat that everything claimed in this article hasn't gone into effect yet. So that's either supposed to be planned or whatever, but it hasn't gone into effect yet. Secondly, you always have to critically question sources like these. So I'll drop the link below so you can check out the original source for yourselves. You can look at it for yourselves and judge how you feel about it. This whole thing is definitely being shared a lot on social media right now. And even if the whole thing that is being told here now is not exactly the same, if that were to happen, similar scenarios could arise here at any time. And one should definitely be prepared for this scenario. So now it's really getting intense. Here's the headline, just chilling. The European Commission wants to use 10 trillion euros of citizen savings for EU defense. So that means 10 trillion, which is like 5 times the market capitalization of Bitcoin. The European Commission estimates that the total unused savings of EU citizens is around 10 trillion. They intend to find ways to mobilize this money. Well, we don't yet know exactly how this is going to happen, but we want to evaluate it here. Just like in the US, for example, they'll find ways to buy Bitcoin. They're trying to find ways here in the EU to seize your assets. It's just crazy what's going on here. It says here that this is to finance their plans for the militarization of Europe and to support the European military-industrial complex. So, an explanation from the EU Commissioner for Financial Services as well as for the Savings and Investment Union. This statement was released by the press service of the European Commission. So, this is really a bombshell. You've got to let that sink in for a moment. We don't really know exactly what that means, but as mentioned before, they're not printing new money or issuing new debt here. Instead, they're looking to tap into the money that already exists. For example, Friedrich Merz once called for the savings of German citizens to be mobilized here. And now the EU is going to do the same thing, just on a larger scale. That means a large portion of the savings in Europe is in the form of deposits with very low interest rates. Here, it's between 0.3 and 0.8% per year, and even in the form of cash reserves. The mobilization of even a small part of these resources will change the investment landscape in the EU, says the EU Commission. And this is really a complete breaking of taboos. Just talking about and discussing something like this and thinking about it. That's already a sign that we're really getting to the point where it should stop now. So yeah, okay, I get a little inflation, 1 or 2% and all that. But now we're moving into the next stages. Now we are making huge, special funds, military packages. Rearm Europe. And now it's about mobilizing the savings. And the next thing that could come is the burden sharing. We'll get to that in just a moment, what that's all about. It goes on to say that the plan announced by EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for the reconstruction of Europe will heavily rely on attracting these private investments. That's right, noted Ms. Albuquerque. So the name is still really, really weird. That's just a plan that's running in the background here. I mean, that's kind of nothing. Everyone has already been speculating about it, at least the people who are paying close attention on this channel. The EU is just a censorship authority. The EU is a surveillance authority. In socialism, you are simply dependent on other people's money. If you can't get the economy in shape yourself, then you have to take it from the contributors. And then it says here, according to you, Europe's problem lies in the gap between unused savings and companies that need financial resources. Therefore, The European Commission intends to create a new concept to mobilize the capital of savers for investments in European industry. This concept will be implemented as part of an EU program, the Investment and Savings Union. And here, according to Thunderline, the European Recovery Plan is supposed to amount to up to 800 billion, but that's just the recovery plan, and then there are the mobilizations on top of that. So to break it down, you're a saver now, and then the EU says, hey, there are other companies, for example, in the war industry. And that's really, really beneficial. And if you're a saver now, then you're just an unproductive force here. We need to tap into your assets and mobilize them because it can't be that your wealth is just sitting there unproductively in a savings account. We need to tap into those assets now and mobilize them. And that's an absolute taboo. So saving is absolutely not rewarded anymore, neither, let's say, in terms of inflation, because we have high inflation and the real interest rates are basically lower than the inflation rate. And secondly, because we still have the risk of expropriation. That means, for those who haven't understood by now, that you should switch to tangible assets, to Bitcoin, to gold, for that matter. Even in productive assets like stocks or something like that, he really doesn't understand what's going on here. That means what's happening here is absolutely dangerous. And I understand anyone who says, hey, I've had enough of this, I'm getting out of the EU or something. I'm done with letting myself get expropriated. And to be the paying idiot. Here the streets are safe again. My money is still safe, my savings are still secure. And I can't even afford a decent pension or something like that here, I don't know, when I'm old, here with my money, because here people are expropriated through inflation, and here through mobilization. And who knows what other options there are. By the way, if you've had enough, and are actually thinking about moving out of Germany or the EU, then check out Bitcoin Advantage. There's a guide here, an immigration guide, on how to best and easiest move abroad. There's even a checklist here of everything you need to consider and keep in mind, and how to move out of the EU or Germany, the fastest and best way, if that's what you want, of course. A lot of people don't want to do that, but it's worth checking out. And you can also test it all out for free and soak up all the information. I'll drop the link below along with the video. And now I've actually found an interesting take here from Sessler, and you definitely need to check it out. I'm going to play you a clip from financial expert Rolf B. And he explains here, or he's not just a financial expert, but also an expert on expropriation, or should I say expertish. But he's definitely talking about expropriation here. He deals a lot with scenarios of expropriation. And he's talking about a scenario, one, that will definitely be coming our way. It doesn't all have to go down in the worst case scenario, but you just have to prepare yourself here, because some serious things are already in the works here. And the government is now trying to go after the low-hanging fruits. The low-hanging fruits here aren't Bitcoin holdings, but rather savings and also real estate assets. And anyone who still owns a property should really pay close attention to what this expert has to say. So, all my alarm bells went off, but what he's saying really makes a lot of sense. I'm going to play the whole video for you. It'll take a few minutes, but it's definitely worth watching. It's absolutely amazing what's being planned behind the scenes.
You just mentioned tangible assets, the things that are naturally limited. Does a property in Berlin or Munich belong to that? Also for that, the building space in Berlin is, as we all know, very limited. Prices are still going up. In the countryside, property prices have actually fallen. The big cities were actually unfazed by that. So, you just didn't mention real estate for a specific reason, or is it still attractive to look into it more?
The reason lies in my hand, in two factors. First, Germans already have a significant concentration risk in real estate when it comes to investments. That's why I don't talk about it from the get-go. And the second thing is, I see real estate as the most vulnerable investment. When it comes to scenarios of expropriation, there's the burden-sharing law. The property is completely transparent through the land register and those things. And that's not for nothing. There are about 8 to 10 trillion in real estate assets there. If I were to grab that, Germany would be debt-free. You just have to see it that way. And I believe that real estate will be targeted. And that's why real estate always needs a special protection concept. He bought it on his own. That's not what I mean. This is often misunderstood. The owner occupied property. Many then say, Piper said I shouldn't own property. Sure, people will always need a place to live. And you shouldn't go into a flight mode where you give up your social circle and stuff like that. That's not what I meant. But some people really have a string of pearls, one property after another, and they're saving on taxes here. And then there's the one loan to pay off the other. That's not good. I don't think that's good, because we're in a debt economy. Real estate belongs in a portfolio, but it needs to be properly weighted.
You just mentioned risks of expropriation. So, the Equalization of Burdens Act, which basically registered a mortgage on the properties. That was after World War II to basically close the financial gap. A lot of people say, yeah, sure, that's never coming back anyway. Many also find it very unlikely. If we take a look now, where the markets currently stand and where Germany's financial situation is at. There could also be an escalation in Ukraine, which we all hope doesn't happen. How high do you see, if you look at it realistically, how high do you see such a risk? Because you really don't know if the government would go that far. I truly think the absolute last resort when nothing else works. So, how high do you estimate the risk of things just falling apart?
So I estimate the risk of expropriation scenarios to be very, very high. I've written a lot of pages in my book about this because it's not just one scenario. Give me one reason why the Equalization of Burdens Act, which was created in the post-war period in 1952 or 1948, why it would be to the turn of the last decade. Work was done. I don't know anyone, unless they want to turn it up a notch. So old laws are being made common. And then there are other scenarios that we have. MLA, anti-money, laundering authority. Say, expropriation clause for government bonds. CCACino, CAC, expropriation house, SAG. Goes if a bank goes bankrupt, your money is a loan to the bank. But the government isn't liable. And so a lot of things come together. And all of that needs to be addressed. BVBG, Asset Concealment Prevention Act. Let's take an example. The AMLA says all assets above 200,000. Then everyone says, okay, I'm not involved in that. Then Lindner comes in, and I have to tell you something. I discussed this with Lindner. Lindner comes in with the VVBG, the Asset Concealment Prevention Act, and he already has the threshold, 100,000. And I got to discuss things with Lindner 3 days before the federal election. RTL was involved. They cut out the beeper, which I already figured out. But I asked him a few things like why not exit the Ample coalition sooner. He said it was a mistake. It should have been done when there were still 60 billion. He was very honest about it. And then I asked him, I don't even have to advertise my services anymore. Now that they've finished the VVBG, a classic suitability scenario, as a draft law. And he only said one single sentence, and that scares me. One single sentence. I'm consistently implementing Brussels directives. And then we know what's going on behind the scenes. A major expropriation scenario is underway. And at some point, the lid that we're making right now, that we're drinking all the way around, let's put it this way, we're in the pub, everyone's drinking on the lid. At some point, it has to be paid for. And we can't just expect the following generations to pay for it all on their own. So, assets will be drawn upon. And let me tell you one thing. Grundfest, manifesto, basic law manifested. I see a scenario that no one is talking about. It's anchored in Germany as a war levy. So now I ask you, who comes up with the idea that if we have to finance the rebuilding of Ukraine in the future and maybe share the costs, the EU or whoever, who says that this card won't be played? That's an extraordinary scenario. And we've been through something like this before. German reunification solidarity surcharge. For 175 billion flowed because it was it was an extraordinary event. Who's to say that the war levy won't be implemented as well? I see scenarios of expropriation. I believe every federal government, no matter which one, and especially this one. I see it as the pioneers of major expropriation scenarios.
Gloomy outlooks you have. Let's hope it doesn't get as bad as they think. I suspect.
So that's just crazy. He's talking about different scenarios of expropriation. So he's not just coming up with one scenario here, but somehow he's coming up with 3, 4, 5, 6 scenarios. And the craziest part is this video, this clip is already like for 5, 6 weeks old or something. So not completely, brand new. But he already said, okay, you can imagine that a war levy is coming here. And what do we have here now? What is being discussed in the video? Nothing, other than a war levy. Instead, it's called rearm, Europe. Or that means here, mobilization of savings deposits in the EU. Or that means special funds or whatever. And those are exactly the things that are coming our way. And that also says here that Germany basically has no say anymore. Instead, everything is being pushed through the EU. And if Germany goes along with it, then okay. But if Germany doesn't go along with it, then European law will just override German law. And then you just get pushed through here. And then you just have to do it here. So roughly speaking, right now, of course, that's not how it works. It all works a bit more diplomatically and so on. But it's really, really scary. I actually don't want to say much more about it, because a lot is being said in this clip about it. Feel free to write in the comments below whether you see such scenarios as realistic. Or do you think that's completely exaggerated? Here's my big recommendation. Check out 21 Bitcoin. Here you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. And with the code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And very, very importantly, Bitcoin is censorship-resistant money that can't be censored, that can't be taken away by the government or anyone else. See you later. Peace out.